Greetings, colleagues. Thank you for the chance to address this important conference and gathering. When I discussed it with Father, we thought it would be safest not to run the risk of bandwidth problems. And so this first piece, for about 25 minutes, more or less, is obviously recorded. But then I hope to join you in person for discussion and questions. And so to begin the discussion, let me ask that each of you think for a moment. Let's try to compare the world today to the world 5, 10, 15 years ago. I wonder if you think that the world today is changing more quickly, it's more complex, you have to make more decisions, it's more complicated. And if we had a few minutes, we could have a discussion about that. But I know what would happen. In every group, people are always feeling, yes, the world is more rapidly changing, it's more complicated. We would surface many ideas, even within the last 2 years, the advances in AI and how this is disrupting so many industries. Or we might think of the geopolitical tensions and violence and issues around climate change that are continuing to accelerate, and so on and so on. We live in a complicated world, and the military in the United States gave us a very handy acronym for describing the world in which we live. They say that we're living in a world that's become VUCA, VUCA. It's volatile. It's unclear, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And even though the military came up with this idea to convey what it feels like to a young soldier to go into a battle zone, I speak to groups in many industries, in many countries, and always people feel that by analogy, it also somehow describes their life. Complex, difficult, hard to see what the future will be like in 5, much less 10 years. And I suspect for an esteemed group like you, given your profession and your commitment, that if we discussed it further, it wouldn't just be the reality of VUCA, the fact of change that strikes you, but also the fact that the nature of the change, the trends, in many cases are not very promising or positive. We might talk again about geopolitical tension, climate change, worsening inequality, the problem of social safety nets where so many people feel they are left out, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, the reality of VUCA creates a need for good leadership. I think this is pretty much apparent, whatever definition of leadership we use. Well, if things are complicated and the future is unclear, leadership is really important. If the world is completely stable and every one of us can see where the world is going, we don't prize leadership as much because we can all understand where we need to go. But in these kinds of environments, leadership is clearly very important. And don't take my word for it. There's a very interesting piece of research done by one of the big accounting firms in the US, Deloitte, and they asked their corporate clients about the challenges within their organizations and the imperative for leadership. And one of the very striking findings is that 80% of clients, 80% of large corporations noted that leadership was really, really important for their organizations, but only 40% said that they were ready to meet this challenge within their organization. In other words, 60% of corporations are basically saying, wow, it's a difficult environment. we do not have the leadership skills that we need within our own organization. That's a damning self-criticism when you think about it. But the reason why I begin my talk with these few minutes about change and VUCA is because I think there's a very powerful opportunity and implication exactly for all of you. Because in a way, these kinds of realities and these kinds of research findings are saying to people like you, okay, look, we need a generation of good leaders. And are you forming this generation for us? What can you contribute to this challenge? And that's where I really want to focus the majority of my comments, which will be about the fact that this reality of VUCA creates an invitation, a challenge, a great opportunity for universities, especially those who touch the Jesuit tradition. You're going to have a unique, if I can put it this way, competitive advantage or something unique to add. And I will go through that in a moment. But to begin to continue to walk our way toward this idea I want to develop, let's do a little more thinking. And now let me ask you, if we think about the world we face and all these VUCA challenges, what do we need? What would be better in terms of leadership? Let me ask you to think to yourselves of the names of one or two living leaders. And then why are you thinking of such a name? So please think as well of the personal qualities, the personal attributes, the personal characteristics you would associate with someone who's leading well. We could have a very interesting group discussion if I were there and we had more time. But frankly, I'm pretty sure I know what kinds of results are going through your mind, because groups almost always come up with the same kinds of thinking. With respect to the names of leaders, often groups are thinking of very famous people. Maybe somebody is thinking of the Pope or Prime Minister Modi or even Donald Trump in my country. And then when we talk about the qualities of leaders, often people are offering ideas like being a good communicator, personal integrity, some sense of direction or vision in life, the ability to motivate others, real concern for others, not to use other people, but to treat them as other people, a sense of empathy, and so on, and a few more ideas. And then I like to point out this interesting disconnect. When we all think of the names of leaders, we stereotypically tend to think of famous people, even super famous people. But when we think of the genuine qualities of good leadership, as I hope you were just doing, for the most part, we tend to think of qualities, behaviors, characteristics that we ourselves could embody every day. So if the ideas you came up with were like some of those on the list I just mentioned, communicate well, personal integrity, empathy for others, so on and so on, well, these are qualities that you don't need to be prime minister of a country or pope to embody. Everyone can embody. There's a general in the United States who in his retirement speech made this very striking comment. And he said that in order to be a leader, you must love those you lead. Even though he was in a very hierarchical profession, where we tend to think of the military as one person giving orders to another, his first comment about what's essential in leadership is loving those you lead. And so now this sets the table for four invitations or challenges I want to give to you, especially to those of you who are working in schools within the Jesuit tradition. And the first idea of the four will be, given what I've just said so far, can you be, or are you being, sufficiently intentional, purposeful about your role, your opportunity for developing leaders? In other words, I just went through a way that we might understand the idea of leadership as not applying only to super famous on top of some hierarchical heap, but in a sense, as pertaining to everyone. One of the dictionary definitions of leadership is to point out a way, direction, or goal and influence others toward it. And isn't it true that all of you, as teachers, administrators, whatever your role, are doing this all the time? You're implicitly pointing out a way to your colleagues, to your students, about how human beings ought to live, how human beings ought to treat each other, what human beings ought to prioritize, and you're having some influence. And the same is absolutely true for the students who come to you for formation. And even though I've read some of your websites and documents, you talk about the role of forming leaders, but how intentional are we really? In other words, do we sit around as administrators, faculty, staff, and say to each other, gee, one of our aspirations is to form leaders. How are we doing that? How does your role as the coach, my role as an administrator, your role as a teacher of language, yours as a teacher of philosophy, how are we each contributing to this puzzle of helping our students understand their leadership calling and opportunity in a VUCA world? So this is my first of four ideas for you, four challenges, invitations for you. Can we be very intentional about our role and opportunity to develop leaders, especially now, something that's so badly needed in the VUCA context? Here's my second idea. It's coming directly from that little quote from the general, you must love those you lead in order to be an effective leader. I guess that within your universities, a phrase like cura personalis is probably fairly well known among many, usually within Jesuit educational institutions. Some folks are talking about this idea as a core element of what should distinguish any higher education in the Jesuit tradition from other places. So cura personalis, care of the person in Latin. And well, the point I want to make for you now is that usually when this idea comes up in conversation around Jesuit education, we talk about it in terms of the kind of culture we want to create, in terms of how students are treated. In other words, our university or college will be a place of cura personalis, where the students have real care for their person, not just sticking facts into their head, although this is important too. And what I want to say, what I want to challenge, is that the general is saying to us, when he says, love those you lead, that cura personalis, in a way, is by no means only or exclusively or most importantly something that should take place within a campus, within a college, but in fact is somehow a quality that all good leaders can exemplify in all dimensions of their life and work. And so the second invitation I give is for those of you who are helping to form young students for the workforce of the future, especially perhaps those who might be in business faculties. Maybe we're teaching them how to be good accountants, how to do present value calculation. We're giving them ethics background. We're teaching them to be good writers and speakers and so on and so on and so on. Are we also articulating for them or helping them to understand the role that cura personalis can and should play in any workplace, especially in this VUCA world where workplaces often are becoming very Darwinian, competitive, difficult places? So that's a second challenge for you. And now a third, as long as we're talking about Jesuit ideals, when I mention cura personalis, let me mention another one. I guess in many of your institutions, many people are familiar with the word magis, another Latin word meaning more. And it's often a kind of a slogan, is not a fair word because it has much more depth than that, but it's often a word that gets thrown around in Jesuit circles, that we have to do what is the magis. And maybe even some place in your institutions or in many Jesuit institutions, somewhere in some building, the letters A, M, D, G are chiseled or painted, which means ad maiorem Dei gloriam, a kind of a motto of the Jesuits, to do what is for God's greater glory. So this is also connected to magis. It's the same kind of word, the same kind of ideal. What's the more? What's for God's greater glory? Now, let me try to quickly connect this to good leadership in a very diverse world where people have many different religious beliefs. So, when we think of magis, often what goes through our mind is working harder, being excellent, trying to be ambitious, trying to be the best. But instead, I want to direct you to a much more fundamental dimension of what these ideas, what this whole Jesuit ideal is about. And in its most fundamental sense, I could say this: it means to work for some purpose that is greater than yourself, not to work for your own self-interest and purposes alone. For Jesuits, when they say ad maiorem Dei gloriam, they're saying, okay, we're here on earth to work for God's greater glory, not for our own greater glory. And when I put it in the way I just phrased it, it becomes an idea that all of us, whatever is our religious belief, can find some common ground. In other words, the great glory of your institutions and universities is that you're places where people from many diverse religious beliefs come together to study. And how they call God or what they understand will differ from one person to another. But surely each of us could agree, whatever is our own beliefs, on this fundamental issue of trying to define and understand our core purpose on earth. Am I here to serve myself? Or am I here for some purpose greater than self? However I understand that in my own tradition, whether a religious way or I'm here to somehow serve the common good. Let me now connect it to our leadership amidst VUCA challenge, because it's the third idea I'm leaving with you. Basically, when we enumerated and thought about some of the qualities some of the trends that are making us think we live in a VUCA world, for many of us, these are trends and changes that have a deep moral content in the sense of being a great moral challenge. For example, our climate is destabilizing in ways that are not healthy, or we are becoming more isolationist, more nationalistic, more prejudiced, more biased in the ways we treat other people, or the social safety nets are falling apart and those who are extremely poor are not enjoying a fair opportunity for education, healthcare, what it may be. And these kinds of big challenges, they will only be solved or will only make progress if we have leaders who have some sense of magis, as I put it, or let's put it more basically, leaders whose sense of the world is, you know something, I'm here on earth, not only or not primarily to make myself rich, to improve my own status, for my own ego, for my own power, but I should be here on earth also to show some leadership to help address some of the challenges brought on in our world. So 3 ideas so far. Can we be more intentional about the role we play as educators in forming leaders and understanding how we do that? Second idea, when we think about the qualities we want to inculcate in the leaders we are forming, can we think of love, cura personalis, care for the other person, desire to have the other person improve and reach their own potential? Can we think of this also as a constituent quality, a priority of the kinds of leaders we want to form? Third idea, I raised the idea of magis. Can we think of the leaders we're forming to inculcate them with the fundamental belief that they should be here on earth, not just for their own ego and advancement and status, but also to serve somehow the common good as we try to tackle these world problems? And my fourth idea will be about self-awareness. I'll cover it just in 2 or 3 minutes because I'm coming up to the time that Father invited me to speak. My fourth idea will be self-awareness. And let me introduce it this way, that the first 3 ideas I introduced, the first 3 challenges, were not really about tips to be a better leader, tactics, or little ways that you could manipulate others to get them to do what you want them to do. I didn't talk about leadership in terms of running meetings, giving speeches, or any of these very day-to-day concrete tricks and tasks that we often associate with leadership. Instead, almost all my remarks so far have been about how we ourselves understand our role as leaders, and even more fundamentally, how do we understand our purpose and role in the world? And so much of what I discussed so far was really a self-awareness exercise, thinking deeply about myself and my calling to lead. And many of you know that the Jesuit tradition includes a wonderful little self-awareness tool or exercise that anyone in this group, and importantly, any one of your students, could begin implementing tomorrow in less than 5 minutes. Let me give you a simplified version. Let's think about my daily life. And when are 1 or 2 occasions when I have, I know that I could make 3 or 4 minutes for myself? So right after the midday meal, I always have a few minutes before my next class or obligation, or when at the end of the school day or work day, I'm going home, I know I always have a few minutes, or even before I go to sleep. And let me make a habit of carving out those few minutes. No phone call, no social media, no music, no interruption. Just myself. And if I'm a religious person, my understanding of higher power. And let me think of three little things. First, why am I grateful as a person? Let me take a few minutes, instead of thinking about problems, thinking about how I can be grateful and why I should be grateful. And second, let me expand my horizon a little bit. Instead of spending my whole day thinking only about what is the next phone call to answer, what's the next text, whatever is 2 centimeters in front of my face, let me open up my horizon and think, let me remind myself why I believe I'm here on earth anyway. And then third step, still in these same few minutes, let me mentally revisit the day so far. The people I was with, the classes I was in, the problems I tackled. And let me try to take away some little lesson that might help me in the next few hours. So, I don't know, this morning I was all preoccupied by some problem I have at home, and I lashed out in a meeting at somebody else who had nothing to do with it. It was my personal problem. So now I will process this, and for the next few hours try to be more present to my work, and maybe even make amends to somebody that I offended. And I think the genius of this simple practice of taking stock for a few minutes becomes very obvious when we think about the world we're all living in now. We're kind of floating on this river of email, meeting, phone call, distraction. I get to the end of the day, I've been 100% present to every random, idiotic, miscellaneous distraction that crossed my radar or rolled past my phone. On the other hand, what I might not have been present to at all is what ultimately is most important. What's going on inside me in some deep way? What's my relationship with my higher power, creator, God, as I understand that in my tradition? And how am I living my calling to be a good leader? Somebody who's pointing out the way, somebody who's having influence all the time. So with that, let me finish. I gave us the context of a VUCA world. In the VUCA world, leadership is really important. If we think about the definition of leadership, pointing away and having influence, we understand that this idea has to do with all of us, not just with super famous people. And then I went through 4 ideas: being more intentional about forming leaders, trying to form leaders who understand how cura personalis, or love, can work in work environments. Third, trying to form leaders who care about purpose greater than self, some sense of magis. And fourth, leaders who have some personal habit to help them become more and more self-aware. And now I'm hoping, with the magic of the internet, that I'll be able to join you live in person for a bit of discussion. Before I do that, I leave this completely up to Father or whoever is moderating the meeting. Before we have back and forth discussion, it might be interesting just for you to turn to 1 or 2 people nearby, and only for 2 or 3 minutes, share what struck you of the remarks I gave. What was one idea that struck you as very interesting or relevant to your own personal situation, or to your college, university, or school's environment? And at that point, after you have your own little chat, maybe it would be interesting for us, and I'm quite open and quite welcome to now have an in-person discussion. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your important mission.